Welcome to Story Tales. Please like this video and subscribe to Story Tales. I hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin. James Harlan gripped the steering wheel tighter as he pulled into the driveway of his dead brother's house. The two-story colonial sat behind a manicured lawn that Jax never would have bothered with. Everything about the place screamed Sable's influence: the decorative shutters, the flower boxes, the pristine walkway that cost more than most people made in a month. His phone buzzed on the passenger seat. Another text from her. "Thanks again for this, James. Nero gets anxious when I'm gone. You're a lifesaver." He deleted it without responding. 11 months. That's how long it had been since he'd set foot on this property. 11 months since Jax fell off the roof during what Sable called routine repairs. 11 months since the funeral where she played the grieving widow while James watched her scan the crowd like she was counting votes. The key felt foreign in his hand as he approached the front door. Sable had insisted on giving him a spare during her surprise visit to his apartment 3 days ago. She'd shown up unannounced, dressed in black yoga pants and a white sweater that probably cost more than his monthly rent. "I have a huge favor to ask," she'd said, not waiting for an invitation inside. "I'm going to that spa in Bend. The one Jax always said I should try. I know it's been difficult between us, but I really need this break." James had stood in his doorway, studying her face. Sable had always been beautiful in the way that made men forget to think. Blonde hair that caught light like spun gold, blue eyes that seemed to see straight through you. But there was something else there now, a calculation that hadn't been there when Jax was alive. "You have neighbors," he'd said. "They're traveling too. Please, James. It's just feeding Nero twice a day. 3 days, max." He wanted to say no. Should have said no. But then she'd mentioned Calder. He's staying with friends for the weekend. You know how teenagers are probably happier without his mom hovering. That had bothered him. Not the part about Calder wanting space that was normal. It was how quickly she dismissed her own son. How easily she'd explained away his absence. Now, standing in front of the house that used to belong to his brother, James wondered why he'd agreed. Family obligation, maybe. Or the simple fact that saying no would have required more conversation than he wanted to have with Sable Harlan Blythe. The front door opened to a living room that looked like a magazine spread. Everything matched. Everything had its place. The coffee table held 3 books arranged at perfect angles, books about interior design and mindfulness that had probably never been opened. Nero appeared from the kitchen, tail wagging. The golden retriever was older now, grayer around the muzzle. But his eyes still held the same gentle intelligence that had made Jax fall in love with him as a puppy. "Hey, boy." James scratched behind the dog's ears. "Where's your food?" The kitchen was as spotless as the living room. James found the dog food in a cabinet, along with detailed instructions written in Sable's careful handwriting. "Feed at 7 a.m. and 6 p.m. Fresh water daily." Let out in the backyard for exactly 20 minutes after each meal, that he filled the bowl and watched Nero eat. The house felt wrong, too quiet, too clean. Jax had been neat enough, but he'd lived in spaces. He'd left coffee rings on tables and tools on counters and books open to pages he planned to return to. This place felt like a showroom. A scratching sound came from somewhere upstairs. Persistent, deliberate. James looked at Nero, who had stopped eating to stare at the ceiling. "What's that about?" The dog whined and padded toward the staircase. The scratching came again as James reached the second floor. Rhythmic, like fingernails against wood. Nero led him down the hallway, past the master bedroom and guest room, to a door James didn't remember. The scratching was coming from inside. He tried the handle. "Locked." "Hello," James called. The scratching stopped. The house keys Sable had given him included several he hadn't identified. James tried 3 before one turned the lock. The door opened to a wave of stale air and the smell of unwashed bodies. The room was small, a converted storage space with no windows. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, casting harsh light over a twin mattress on the floor. Calder lay on the mattress, unconscious that James's nephew was 13 but looked younger. His clothes hung loose on his frame, and his skin had the gray pallor of someone who hadn't seen sunlight in weeks. Bruises marked his arms and neck, some fresh, others fading to yellow. "Jesus Christ." James dropped to his knees beside the mattress. Calder. Calder, wake up. No response. The boy's breathing was shallow but steady. James felt for a pulse and found it weak, but there. His phone was in his hand before he consciously decided to call 911. 911, what's your emergency? I need an ambulance. 1247, Maple Drive. 13-year-old male, unconscious, possible malnutrition. Is the child breathing? Yes, but barely. He's been locked in a room. I think. James stopped himself. Think before you speak. The Marines had taught him that. Just send the ambulance. Units are on the way. Can you stay on the line? James checked Calder's airway, tilted his head back, felt again for the pulse at his neck. The boy's lips were dry and cracked. How long had he been in here? Sir, are you still there? I'm here. I'm going to try CPR. Is the child breathing? Barely. James positioned his hands on Calder's chest and began compressions. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. 30 more. The boy's ribs felt fragile under his palms. Sirens wailed in the distance. Growing closer on the 15th compression, Calder's eyes fluttered open. Uncle James. The voice was barely a whisper, but it was the most beautiful sound James had ever heard. I'm here, buddy. You're going to be okay, she said. Calder's eyes drifted closed again. Don't talk. Save your strength. The front door burst open downstairs. Heavy footsteps on the hardwood, voices calling directions. Up here. James shouted. 2 paramedics appeared in the doorway, followed by a police officer James didn't recognize. What happened? The first paramedic knelt beside Calder, pushing James aside gently but firmly. I found him like this. He was locked in. How long has he been unconscious? I don't know. I just got here. The paramedics worked with practiced efficiency, checking vital signs, starting in 4, transferring Calder to a stretcher. James watched from the doorway as they carried his nephew down the stairs. The police officer, a woman in her 40s with short gray hair, stayed behind. Detective Morrison, she said. Can you tell me what happened? James explained about the dog, the key, the scratching sound. He kept his answers short and factual. Give them enough to do their job, nothing more. Where are the boy's parents? His father is dead. My brother. His mother is out of town. And you are? James Harlan, the boy's uncle. Detective Morrison wrote in a small notebook. How well do you know the family? Well enough. She looked up from her notes. That's not really an answer. I know them well enough to care about that kid. Not well enough to know he was locked in a room. Any idea why someone would do this? James met her eyes. No, it wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't entirely false either. He had ideas, suspicions, but suspicions weren't facts, and facts were all that mattered right now. We'll need you to come to the station for a formal statement. Fine, and we'll need to secure the scene until we can process it properly. James nodded. What about the dog? The dog. I came here to feed him. He'll need to be taken care of. Detective Morrison studied his face. That's your priority right now. Someone has to look out for him. She made another note. We'll figure something out. The police station smelled like coffee and industrial disinfectant. James sat in a small interview room, waiting. They'd been polite, so far offered him water, asked if he needed anything. But polite could change fast. Detective Morrison entered with a younger man in a cheap suit. This is Detective Pierce, she said. He'll be assisting with the case. Pierce had the eager look of someone trying to prove himself. James had seen the type in the service, young officers who thought aggression was the same as competence. Let's start from the beginning, Morrison said. What did you last see Calder? Maybe 2 months ago, at a school event. How did he seem? Like a normal kid. Quiet, but that's how he's always been. Any signs of abuse? Neglect? James considered the question. Not that I noticed, but you weren't looking for them. No. Pierce leaned forward. Tell us about your relationship with Sable Harlan Blythe. There is no relationship. She's your sister-in-law. She was married to my brother. He's dead. Now she's not. You don't like her. It wasn't a question. James didn't answer. What? Pierce pressed. Personal reasons. Such as, she killed my brother. The words hung in the air. Morrison's pen stopped moving. Pierce sat back in his chair. That's a serious accusation, Morrison said. I didn't accuse her of anything. You asked why I don't like her. That's why. Do you have any evidence to support that belief? No. Then why do you believe it? James was quiet for a long moment. Because I knew my brother. He didn't drink and climb on roofs. People do stupid things all the time. Not Jack's. Pierce made a show of consulting his notes. According to the report from last year, your brother had a blood alcohol level of 0.12 when he fell. According to Sable. According to the medical examiner. James said nothing. Let's talk about today, Morrison said. You said you went to the house to feed the dog. That's right. Sable asked you to do this. Yes. When? 3 days ago. How did she contact you? She came to my apartment. What time? Around 7 in the evening. How did she seem? Normal. Define normal. James thought about it. Calm. Put together. Like she was asking me to pick up her dry cleaning. And you agreed to help her. Yes. Even though you believe she killed your brother. I didn't do it for her. Who'd you do it for? The dog. And Calder. Pierce jumped in. Speaking of Calder, you performed CPR on him. He wasn't breathing well. Have you had medical training? Basic first aid. Military. Which branch? Marines. How long? 8 years. See any combat? James looked at Pierce. What does that have to do with anything? Just trying to get a complete picture. Morrison shot her partner a warning look. Let's focus on today. When you found Calder, did you move him? Only to check his pulse and breathing. Did you touch his neck? To check for pulse, yes. Anywhere else? His chest, for CPR. The detectives exchanged a look James didn't like. What, he said. We'll need to take some photos, Morrison said. For elimination purposes. Your hands. Mainly. What? There were marks on Calder's neck. We need to rule out that they came from you when you administered aid. James held out his hands. Take your pictures. Pierce left the room and returned with a camera. He photographed James's hands from multiple angles, paying special attention to his fingernails. We'll also need you to provide a DNA sample, Morrison said. For elimination. That's right. James opened his mouth and let Pierce swab the inside of his cheek. Everything felt routine, but something was off. The questions were too pointed. The elimination samples too thorough. One more thing, Morrison said. We found something at the house we'd like you to explain. She produced an evidence bag containing a small glass vial. Recognize this? James leaned forward. The vial had a pharmacy label. His name was printed clearly on the white sticker. That's not mine. Your name is on it. I can see that. It's still not mine. What kind of medication do you take, Mr. Harlan? None. No prescriptions at all? No. Pierce made a note. When was the last time you saw a doctor? VA, physical 2 years ago. Any mental health treatment? No. The label says this is a sedative, Morrison said. Prescribed by Dr. Martinez at Westside Family Practice. I've never been to Westside Family Practice. Then how did your name get on this prescription? I have no idea. But he was starting to get one. The pieces were falling into place, the locked room, the timing, the careful questions about his hands and his contact with Calder. Am I under arrest? Should you be? I didn't hurt that kid. We never said you did. James stood up. If I'm not under arrest, I'm leaving. Morrison held up a hand. Sit down, Mr. Harlan. There's one more thing. She produced a second evidence bag. This one contained a small digital recorder. We found this on Sable's kitchen counter. It had one message. She pressed play. Sable's voice filled the room, distorted by static but clearly audible. Calder, honey, I need you to stay in your room while I'm gone. Uncle James gets angry sometimes, and I don't want you to make him mad. He has a temper, you know. Just stay quiet, and everything will be fine. The recording clicked off. James stared at the device. She left that for you to find. Why would she do that? Because she's setting me up. Pierce laughed. That's pretty paranoid thinking. Is it? My nephew is found locked in a room. There's a sedative with my name on it. And now there's a convenient recording suggesting I'm dangerous. Maybe because you are dangerous, Pierce said. Morrison shot him another look, but James caught something in her expression. She was thinking the same thing. We'll need you to stay in town while we investigate, Morrison said. Am I a suspect? You're a person of interest. In what? Attempted murder. The words hit James like a physical blow. He'd known this was coming, but hearing it out loud made it real. I want a lawyer. That's your right. But before you make that call, you should know we've contacted Sable. She's cutting her trip short to come home. I'm sure she is. She's very concerned about you, Mr. Harlan. Says you've been unstable since your brother's death. Angry. She even mentioned that you'd been in some legal trouble recently. James felt his jaw tighten. What kind of legal trouble? A restraining order. Filed by your ex-wife during a custody dispute. That was dropped, but it was filed because she wanted to hurt me. Just like this. Whatever game Sable is playing. Morrison closed her notebook. We'll be in touch, Mr. Harlan. Don't leave town. James walked out of the station into the afternoon sunlight. His truck sat in the parking lot, but he didn't get in right away. Instead, he stood there, thinking Sable had played this perfectly. The timing, the evidence, the setup. She'd probably been planning it since the moment she'd knocked on his door 3 days ago. The question was why. His phone rang. Unknown number. James Harlan. Mr. Harlan, this is News Channel 8. We're doing a story about the situation with your nephew. Would you like to comment? James hung up. The phone rang again immediately. Different number. He turned it off and got in his truck. By the time he reached his apartment, there were 2 news vans parked on the street. James woke to the sound of his doorbell ringing. Through the peephole, he saw a man in his 70s with graying hair and work-worn hands. Clem Brody stood on the porch holding a paper bag and a thermos. Figured you might need some breakfast, Clem said when James opened the door. They'd worked together at the vocational school for 5 years. Clem taught automotive repair in the bay next to James's welding lab. He was the closest thing to a friend James had, which meant they talked maybe once a week and never about anything personal. Thanks. James took the bag. The smell of bacon and eggs made his stomach growl. How did you know? Saw the news. Clem stepped inside and looked around the sparse apartment. Figured you could use some company. I didn't do it. I know. How can you be sure? Clem shrugged. You don't hurt kids. And you're not stupid enough to get caught if you did. It was the closest thing to a character reference James had heard in years. Coffee's still hot, Clem said, nodding toward the thermos. Made it strong. They sat at James's small kitchen table. The breakfast was good real food, not the protein bars and instant coffee James usually survived on. Tell me about the brother, Clem said. Jax, the one who died. James chewed slowly, thinking about how much to say. He fell off a roof. 11 months ago. Accident. That's what they called it. But you don't think so. I know so. Clem waited. Jax was afraid of heights. James said finally. Always had been, since we were kids. He wouldn't even clean gutters without hiring someone else to go up there. People change. Not about things like that. And he didn't drink. Maybe a beer with dinner, but never enough to affect his judgment. So what do you think happened? James met the older man's eyes. I think she killed him. The wife. Sable. Why? Money. Control. Because she could. James took a sip of coffee. Does it matter? Might. If you're right about her, then this thing with the boy is part of a pattern. What kind of pattern? James stood and walked to the window. The news vans were gone, but he could see people on the sidewalk slowing down as they passed his building. Word was getting out. Sable collects people, he said. Especially men. She finds their weak spots and pushes until they break. What was your brother's weak spot? He wanted to be loved. Clem nodded slowly. And yours? I don't have one. Everyone has one. James turned from the window. She thinks mine is justice. Doing the right thing. She's counting on me trying to prove my innocence instead of what? Instead of proving her guilt. Clem finished his coffee and stood. Vale hearings this afternoon. I talked to a lawyer friend of mine from the union days. He'll represent you. I can't afford a lawyer. Already taken care of. Clem, my money, my choice. Besides, I never liked that woman. Something off about her. What do you mean? Saw her at the school once, couple years back. She came to some event with your brother. Spent the whole time watching people instead of talking to them. Like she was taking notes. James remembered that night. A fundraiser for new equipment. Jax had been proud to bring Sable. Wanted to show her off to his brother's colleagues. She was mapping the room. James said. What? Nothing. Just thinking out loud. Clem headed for the door. One more thing. The kid called her. How's he doing? I don't know. They won't let me see him. Because you're a suspect. Because his mother doesn't want me to. Same thing, maybe. After Clem left, James sat alone in his apartment, thinking about patterns. Sable had a type man with something she wanted. Jax had money from their father's construction business. James had credibility, at least until now. But what did she want from Calder? His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Raina DuPont. We served together in Afghanistan. Can we meet? James stared at the message. He remembered Raina, a staff sergeant with the military police. Smart, tough, uncompromising. What was she doing in Oregon? He texted back. When and where? Denny's on Highway 99. 1 hour. The bail hearing went better than expected. The judge set a high $50,000, but Clem had somehow arranged for a bondsman. James walked out of the courthouse 3 hours after walking in. The lawyer, a thin man named Garrett who looked like he lived on cigarettes and coffee, wasn't optimistic. They've got circumstantial evidence, he said as they stood on the courthouse steps. But it's a lot of circumstantial evidence. The prescription, the fingerprints, the recording, all planted. Prove it. I'm working on that. Work faster. The DA likes high-profile cases, and this one's got all the elements: child abuse, family dysfunction, veteran with anger issues. I don't have anger issues. You sure about that? James looked at him. Yes. Good. Because if you lose your temper in front of the wrong person, this case is over. Raina was waiting in a corner booth at Denny's, nursing a cup of coffee. She looked older than James remembered, but then again, they all did. Military time aged you differently, not just the years, but the weight of the things you'd seen. James! Raina. She gestured to the seat across from her. Heard you were having some trouble. That's one way to put it. What's another way? I'm being framed for attempted murder. Raina nodded like this was the most natural thing in the world. By who? My sister-in-law. What? Still working on that part. A waitress appeared and refilled Raina's cup. James ordered coffee and waited until she was gone. What are you doing in Oregon? He asked. I work for Child Protective Services now. Have for 3 years. Social worker. Investigator. I look into cases where kids are being hurt. James felt something click into place. Calder. I can't discuss specific cases, but you can meet me at Denny's. I can have coffee with an old friend. They sat in silence for a moment. James studied Raina's face, looking for clues about what she knew. Hypothetically, she said, if someone wanted to hurt a child and frame someone else for it, how would they do it? Hypothetically, of course. James thought about it. They'd create evidence that pointed to the other person. Plant physical evidence, establish motive, make sure the timing worked. And if they wanted to make sure the child couldn't contradict their story, they'd keep the child unconscious or scared into silence. Raina nodded. Hypothetically, of course. What are you telling me? I'm not telling you anything. I'm asking questions. Ask them. How well did you know your brother's wife? Not well. Jax kept us separate. What? He said she didn't like military types. But he introduced you. At the wedding. And a few family events after that. How did she seem during those meetings? James thought back. Charming. Interested. Asked a lot of questions. What kind of questions? About my work. My schedule. My personal life. He paused. My temper. She was specifically interested in your temper. She mentioned it a few times. Asked Jax about it when she thought I couldn't hear. What did Jax tell her? That I used to have problems with anger. When we were younger. Used to. I learned to control it. How? Practice. And consequences. Raina leaned forward. What kind of consequences? The kind that teach you to think before you act. She sat back. Hypothetically, if someone wanted to frame you specifically, your past issues with anger control would be useful. Hypothetically. And if they had access to your personal information, social security number, date of birth, that kind of thing, they could probably get a prescription in your name. How would they get that information? Family members usually have access to each other's personal documents. James felt the pieces falling into place. She had access to Jax's files. And Jax would have had my information for emergency contacts. Hypothetically, what about the recording? The one where she warns Calder about me? Hypothetically, that would be easy to fake. Especially if you had a digital recorder and some basic editing software. And the timing, what about it? She asked me to watch the dog 3 days ago, but she would have needed time to set everything up: the prescription, the recording, getting Calder into that room. Raina was quiet for a long moment. Hypothetically, if someone was planning something like this, they would have started planning well in advance. How far in advance? Months, maybe longer. James felt a chill. Since Jax died, that would make sense. Hypothetically, they finished their coffee in silence. As they prepared to leave, Raina handed him a business card. If you remember anything else about your interactions with your sister-in-law, call me. Will you be able to help? I'll do what I can, within the limits of my job. And outside those limits. Raina met his eyes. I didn't hear that question. James drove past his brother's house twice before parking down the street. Police tape still crossed the front door, but the patrol car was gone. The investigation was moving to other priorities. He walked around to the backyard, checking for neighbors. The Hendersons to the left were elderly and rarely went outside. The house to the right was empty. A for sale sign had been planted in the front yard for months. The garage sat behind the main house, connected by a concrete walkway. James tried the side door. Locked. But he remembered something from childhood: Jax's habit of hiding spare keys under flower pots. The third pot yielded an old brass key. The garage was exactly as James remembered it. Jax's workbench along one wall, tools hanging in neat rows above it. His truck sat in the center, covered by a tarp. Everything was clean and organized. Jax had always been methodical about his space. James wasn't sure what he was looking for until he found it. A folded piece of paper taped under the workbench. His name written on it in Jax's handwriting. Inside, a single line. Attic access behind the water heater. James moved the water heater and found a panel he'd never noticed before. Behind it, a narrow ladder led up into darkness. The attic space was cramped but clean. Jax had used it for storage: Christmas decorations, old furniture, boxes of documents. But in the far corner, under a tarp, James found what his brother had hidden: a digital voice recorder, still containing files, a manila envelope filled with photographs, a stack of legal documents. James took everything back down to the garage and spread it out on the workbench. The voice recorder had 3 files. The first was dated 6 weeks before Jax's death. His brother's voice, shaky and uncertain. I don't know if anyone will ever hear this, but if something happens to me, I want there to be a record. Sable's been acting strange lately. Secretive. She's been going through our financial documents, asking questions about the business, about my life insurance. A pause. Papers rustling. I hired a private investigator. Found out she's been meeting with someone, a man named Vance Keller. They've been seen together at least 3 times in the past month. The second file was dated 2 weeks later. The investigator found more. Sable's been researching how to have someone declared mentally incompetent. She's been asking my doctor questions about my mental state, suggesting I've been depressed or unstable. She's building a case. Jax's voice was stronger now, more certain. I changed my will today. Cut her out completely. If something happens to me, I want James to have custody of Calder. I know he'll take care of him. The third file was recorded just 3 days before Jax died. She knows I know. I confronted her about Vance Keller tonight. She didn't deny it, just smiled and said I shouldn't worry about things I can't control. I think she's planning something. If I die in the next few days, it won't be an accident. James played the recordings twice, then turned to the photographs. Sable and a man James didn't recognize, sitting in a restaurant booth. The same man entering Sable's house while Jax's truck was parked at the work site. Sable handing the man an envelope in a parking lot. The man was tall, thin, with prematurely gray hair. He had the look of someone who'd been handsome once, but was wearing down around the edges. The legal documents were copies of Jax's, both the original and the revised version. In the original, Sable inherited everything. In the revision, the house went to Calder in trust, with James as guardian. The life insurance and business assets were split between James and Calder. At the bottom of the stack, James found something else. A receipt for a safe deposit box, rented 3 days before Jax died. He memorized the bank name and box number, then carefully put everything back in the attic. If Sable found out he'd been here, she'd know he was getting close. But as he prepared to leave, he heard a car door slam in the driveway. Through the garage window, he watched Sable get out of a white BMW. She looked exactly the same as always, perfectly dressed, perfectly composed. But there was something different in the way she moved. Purpose, determination. She was carrying a large black bag. James waited until she went inside, then slipped out the side door and made his way back to his truck. As he drove away, he saw her come back outside and walk to the garage. She was covering her tracks, just like he was covering his, but now he had what he needed to start uncovering hers. The bank was closed, but James drove past it anyway, studying the layout. Tomorrow, he needed to find a way to access that safe deposit box. Tonight, he had other work to do. He spent the evening researching Vance Keller. The man had a record: domestic violence, fraud, theft. He'd been arrested 3 times in the past 5 years, but charges had been dropped or reduced each time. Someone had been looking out for him. The most recent arrest was interesting: assault charges filed by a woman named Patricia Chun. But 2 weeks later, Patricia Chun had withdrawn the charges and moved out of state. James found her new address online and called the number. "Hello, Ms. Chun. My name is James Harlan. I'm calling about Vance Keller." A long silence. "Who is this?" "Someone who thinks Vance Keller hurt my family. I can't talk about this. Please, I just need to know. He's dangerous. Stay away from him." "Where's he now?" "I don't know. He disappeared about 3 months ago." "Disappear how?" "He just stopped showing up. Stop calling. His landlord said he moved out in the middle of the night. 3 months ago. That would be about 2 months after Jax died." "Ms. Chun, did anyone approach you about dropping the charges?" "I can't. Please." Another silence. A woman. Blonde. Well-dressed. "She offered me money to move away and forget about Vance." "How much money?" "Enough." "What was her name?" "She said she was his sister. But I don't think that was true." "Why not?" "Sisters don't look at their brothers the way she looked at him." James felt his pulse quicken. What did she look at him? Like he was disposable. The next morning, James drove to the bank as soon as it opened. He brought copies of Jax's death certificate and his own ID, hoping they'd be enough to access the safe deposit box. They weren't. "I'm sorry, Mr. Harlan," the bank manager said. "Only the box renter or someone with a court order can access the contents. My brother is dead. I understand, but without proper legal documentation." "What kind of documentation? Letters of administration, or executor status, or a court order?" James left the bank frustrated but not defeated. There were other ways to get information. He spent the afternoon at the library, using their computers to dig deeper into Vance Keller's background. What he found made his blood run cold. Vance had a pattern. He'd been linked to 3 suspicious deaths over the past 10 years, all ruled accidents or suicides, all involving women who'd filed complaints against him. Patricia Chun had been lucky to get away. But more interesting was what James found about Vance's disappearance. His car had been found abandoned in a parking lot near the Columbia River, just across the Washington border. The keys were still in it. His wallet was on the front seat, money intact. Police had investigated briefly, but with no evidence of foul play and no family to push for answers, the case had gone cold. James drove to the location where the car had been found. The parking lot served a boat launch and fishing area remote enough that a car could sit for days without being noticed. He walked down to the water, trying to picture what had happened. If someone had wanted to get rid of Vance, this would be a perfect spot. Deep water, strong current, lots of places for a body to disappear. But why would Sable want Vance dead? James thought about what Patricia Chun had said. Sisters don't look at their brothers the way she looked at him. Maybe Vance had outlived his usefulness. Maybe he'd known too much. Or maybe he'd started asking for more money than Sable wanted to pay. His phone rang as he walked back to his truck. "James, it's Garrett. We need to talk." "What's wrong?" "The DA's office called. They're moving forward with formal charges. Attempted murder, child endangerment, and conspiracy." "Conspiracy with who?" "They think you had help." James felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Who?" "They wouldn't say, but they want you to come in for another interview." "When?" "Tomorrow morning." "And James? Don't talk to anyone about the case between now and then. Don't go anywhere you shouldn't go. They're watching you." James hung up and looked around the parking lot. He didn't see anyone, but that didn't mean they weren't there. He drove home carefully, checking his mirrors. If they were watching him, they'd seen him visit the bank, the library, the boat launch. They'd start putting pieces together that he needed to move faster. That evening, he called Raina. "I can't meet in person," she said, "but I can talk for a few minutes. I found evidence. About my brother's death. about the man who was working with Sable. What kind of evidence? Recordings, photos, financial documents. Where did you find them? Hidden in my brother's garage. James, you need to be careful. If you're right about your sister-in-law, and if she finds out you have this information, she already knows I'm investigating. The question is what she'll do about it. People like that don't just stop. They escalate. What do you mean? If she framed you for hurting Calder and it doesn't stick, she'll try something else. Something worse. James thought about that. What could be worse than attempted murder? Actual murder. Whose? Yours. Or Calder's. Or both. The line went quiet. Raina, I'm here. I'm just thinking. A pause. There might be a way to help. But it would have to be unofficial. What kind of help? I could arrange for Calder to be transferred to a different facility. Somewhere safer. And I could make sure he's available to talk to the right people when the time comes. What do you need from me? Proof. Real evidence. Not just recordings and photographs. Something that would hold up in court. I'm working on it. Work faster. I have a feeling we're running out of time. After Raina hung up, James sat in his apartment, thinking about his next move. The safe deposit box was still locked, but there might be other ways to get the information he needed. That he made a list of everyone who might have known about Sable and Vance's relationship. The private investigator Jax had hired. Neighbors who might have seen them together. Bank employees who might have processed payments. But as he wrote, James realized something else, that if Sable had killed Vance to cover her tracks, there would be evidence. Phone records, financial transactions, maybe even physical evidence. He just had to figure out where to look. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Stop digging or join your brother. James stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it. That he was getting close. Close enough to scare her. That meant he was also close enough to get himself killed. But for the first time since this started, James smiled. Let her try. The call came at 6 in the morning. Mr. Harlan? This is Dr. Martinez at Sacred Heart Hospital. Calder Harlan is awake and asking for you. James was dressed and in his truck within 10 minutes. The hospital corridors smelled like antiseptic and fear. James found Calder's room on the 3rd floor, but a security guard blocked his path. Sorry, sir. Family only. I am family, not according to the list. James looked through the small window in the door. Calder was sitting up in bed, talking to a woman in a business suit. Even from this distance, James could see his nephew was alert and coherent. Can you at least tell him I'm here? The guard considered this. Wait here. He went into the room and spoke quietly to the woman. She looked up and saw James through the window. After a moment, she came out. Mr. Harlan? I'm Sarah Kim from Child Protective Services. Calder has been asking about you. Can I see him? There are some complications with that request. What kind of complications? You're currently under investigation for his assault. I didn't assault him. That's not for me to decide. But Calder has some things he wants to say. Things that might be relevant to your case. James felt hope stirring in his chest. What kind of things? He'll need to tell you himself. But first, I need to ask you some questions. They sat in a small consultation room down the hall. Sarah Kim was younger than James had expected, with serious eyes and careful hands. Calder says his mother locked him in that room, she said without preamble. How long was he in there? 3 days. She told him she was going on a trip and that he needed to stay hidden until she got back. Why would she do that? He says she was angry about something. Something to do with you. James leaned forward. What did she tell him about me? That you were dangerous. That you wanted to hurt him. That the only way to keep him safe was to keep him away from you. He believed that. He's 13, Mr. Harlan. He believed his mother. What changed his mind? Sarah Kim consulted her notes. When you found him in that room, you called 911 immediately. You performed CPR. You stayed with him until the paramedics arrived. So if you wanted to hurt him, you had the perfect opportunity. Instead, you saved his life. They sat in silence for a moment. There's something else, Sarah Kim said. Calder remembers his mother giving him something to drink before she locked him in a room. Something that made him sleepy. The sedative. Possibly. We're still waiting for blood test results. Can I see him now? 5 minutes. And I'll be in the room the entire time. Calder looked smaller in the hospital bed, but his eyes were clear and focused. When James entered the room, the boy's face lit up. Uncle James. Hey, buddy. James sat in the chair beside the bed. How are you feeling? Better. The doctors say I'm going to be okay. I'm glad. Calder looked at Sarah Kim, then back at James. I told them the truth. About Mom. About what she did. I know. She said you were dangerous. But you're not, are you? James met his nephew's eyes. No, Calder. I'm not. I thought about Dad a lot while I was in that room. About how he used to talk about you. What did he say? That you were the strongest person he knew. That you always did the right thing, even when it was hard. James felt something tight in his chest. Your dad was a good man. Mom said he was weak. That's why he fell off the roof. Your mom was wrong about a lot of things. Calder nodded. I want to live with you. When this is over, we'll see what we can work out. I mean it. I don't want to go back to her. Sarah Kim cleared her throat. That's enough for now. Calder needs his rest. As James stood to leave, Calder grabbed his hand. Uncle James? Be careful. Mom's really good at making people believe her. I know, but I don't believe her anymore. Outside in the hallway, Sarah Kim walked with James toward the elevators. Calder's testimony will be crucial to your case, she said. Will it be enough? I don't know, but it's a start. The elevator doors opened, and James stepped inside. Mr. Harlan. Sarah Kim held the doors open. There's someone else who wants to talk to you. Someone who's been watching this case. Who? Raina DuPont. She said you'd know what that means. James felt the pieces clicking into place. Where? She'll find you. The elevator doors closed, and James descended to the ground floor. As he walked through the lobby, his phone buzzed. Coffee shop across from the hospital. Now, Raina was waiting in a corner booth just like before, but this time she had files spread across the table. Calder's talking, she said as James sat down. I know. I just saw him. His testimony changes everything, but it also puts him in danger. What kind of danger? The kind that happens when 13-year-old boys become the star witnesses in attempted murder cases. James understood. She'll try to discredit him. Or worse. What do you mean? Raina leaned forward. I've been looking into your sister-in-law's background. She's done this before. Done what? Used children as weapons. Manipulated custody situations. Destroyed families. She slid a file across the table. Rebecca Marsh. Married Sable's first husband, David Blythe, in 2018. David had a daughter from a previous marriage, Emma, age 10. James opened the file. Police reports, court documents, medical records. What happened? David and Rebecca divorced after 18 months. Nasty custody battle. Sable testified that Rebecca was abusing Emma. Medical evidence backed her up: bruises, malnutrition, psychological trauma. Rebecca lost custody. More than that, she was arrested, tried, and convicted. Served 3 years for child abuse. And Emma went to live with David and Sable. 6 months later, Emma was dead. James felt ice in his veins. Ow! Allergic reaction. Supposedly ate something she shouldn't have. But Emma had lived with that allergy her whole life. She knew better. What happened to Rebecca? Suicide. 3 weeks after Emma's death. James stared at the documents. Jesus. There's more. David Blythe died 2 years later. Car accident on a mountain road. Sable inherited everything. And now she's married to Jax. Was married to Jax, who's also dead. The pattern was clear. Sable found men with children and money. She eliminated obstacles, sometimes the children, sometimes the ex-wives, sometimes the men themselves. Why didn't anyone see the connection? Different states, different names. She was Rebecca Marsh Blythe in California. Sable Harlan Blythe in Oregon. Same woman, different identity. How did you figure out? I ran her fingerprints through the system. Found the connection to the California case. Started digging from there. James felt the weight of it all settling on him. She's not just a killer. She's a serial killer with a very specific type. Men with children and assets. And now she's framed me for trying to kill Calder. Because you're the obstacle. Jax left custody to you, not her. She can't get to Calder's inheritance with you in the picture. So she gets rid of me. That was the plan. But Calder's testimony ruins everything. James thought about the boy in the hospital bed, pale but determined. She'll come after him. Maybe. Or she'll run. Where would she go? Raina gathered up the files. I don't know. But I know someone who might. Who? Vance Keller's mother. She lives in Portland. I think it's time you two had a conversation. Martha Keller lived in a small apartment in northeast Portland. She was in her 70s, with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much disappointment. "You're here about Vance," she said when James introduced himself. "Yes, ma'am. He's dead, isn't he?" The directness of the question caught James off guard. "What makes you say that?" "Because he would have called me by now. Whatever else Vance was, he was still my son. He called every month, even when he was in trouble." She led James into a small living room filled with photographs of a young man James recognized as Vance Keller. "When did you last hear from him?" "February. 3 months ago." She sat in a recliner that had seen better days. He sounded scared. Scared of what? Some woman he'd been working with. Said she was getting rid of loose ends. Did he mention her name? Sable. Pretty name for an ugly person. James leaned forward. "What did he tell you about her?" "That she was dangerous. That she'd killed people before and would do it again. He wanted to get away from her, but she had something on him." "What kind of something?" "Evidence. Photos. Something that would put him in prison." "For what?" Martha Keller was quiet for a long moment. "My son wasn't a good man, Mr. Harlan. He hurt people, especially women. But he didn't deserve to die." "What do you think happened to him?" "I think she killed him, just like she killed that man she was married to." "You know about Jax?" "Vance told me. Said he helped her stage it to look like an accident. Said she promised him money and a new start somewhere else. But instead she killed him." "That's what I think, yes." Martha Keller stood and walked to a small desk by the window. She pulled out a manila envelope. "He sent me this a week before he disappeared. Said if anything happened to him, I should give it to the police." James opened the envelope. Inside were photographs, bank records, and a handwritten letter. The photos showed Sable and Vance together in various locations. But these weren't surveillance photos, they were personal pictures, the kind people take to document their relationship. The bank records showed payments from an account in Sable's name to an account in Vance's name. Small amounts at first, then larger ones. The final payment was for $50,000, dated the day before Jax died. The letter was in Vance's handwriting. "If you're reading this, Sable probably killed me. She's been planning to get rid of me since we killed her husband. I helped her stage the accident because she promised me money and a clean start. But I know too much, and she's the kind of person who ties up loose ends. The husband's death wasn't the first. She told me about others, a girl in California, another husband before that. She collects people and throws them away when she's done with them. Did I try to blackmail her? Big mistake. She's smarter than I am and meaner than I could ever be. If I disappear, check the river." She said that's where she put the girl. James read the letter twice. "Why didn't you take this to the police?" "Because Vance was a criminal. They would have looked at his record and dismissed everything as the ramblings of a dead lowlife. But now there's another victim. That boy in the hospital. Maybe they'll listen now." James carefully put everything back in the envelope. "Can I take this? That's why I gave it to you." As James prepared to leave, Martha Keller grabbed his arm. "Be careful, young man. That woman is evil in a way most people can't understand. She doesn't just kill people, she destroys them first." James drove back to his apartment with the envelope on the passenger seat. He now had enough evidence to clear his name and put Sable away forever. But he also knew she wouldn't go quietly. His phone rang as he parked. "James, it's Garrett. We need to meet. Now. What's wrong?" The DA's office got an anonymous tip. "Someone claiming to have information about your relationship with Calder." "What kind of information?" "They wouldn't say, but they've scheduled a press conference for tomorrow morning. I think they're going to announce additional charges." James felt the trap closing around him. "She's making her move." "Who?" "Sable. She knows I'm getting close, so she's escalating." "James, whatever you're planning, don't. Let me handle this through proper channels." "The proper channels got me arrested for attempted murder, and going outside them will get you arrested for murder." James hung up and sat in his truck, thinking. Sable was backing him into a corner, but corners could be advantages if you knew how to use them. He called the number for KTU News. "This is James Harlan. I understand you've been covering the story about my nephew. Mr. Harlan, we'd love to get your side of the story. I'm ready to talk, but I want to do it live during your evening broadcast. That's unusual. Most people prefer recorded interviews." "I'm not most people. and I have information that your viewers need to hear." There was a pause. "What kind of information?" "The kind that proves my innocence and exposes the real killer." "We'll need to verify." "You'll have your verification. Meet me at the courthouse steps at 5 o'clock. Bring cameras." James hung up and called 2 more news stations with the same offer. Then he called Raina. "I'm going public tonight," he said. "James, that's dangerous. More dangerous than letting her control the narrative. If you reveal what you know, she'll run. Let her try. I've got enough evidence to make sure she doesn't get far. Where she comes after called her first." James had thought about that. "Then you'll be ready for her." That evening, James stood on the courthouse steps with reporters from 3 television stations and 2 newspapers. He held the envelope Martha Keller had given him, along with copies of the recordings from Jax's attic. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, looking directly into the cameras, "I'm about to tell you about a woman who has killed at least 4 people, possibly more. A woman who framed me for attempted murder to cover up her own crimes. A woman who's been hiding in plain sight for years." He opened the envelope and began to read. The story hit the evening news like a bomb. By midnight, every major news outlet in the Pacific Northwest was running the story. By morning, it had gone national. James's phone hadn't stopped ringing, but he'd turned it off hours ago. He sat in his apartment, watching the coverage on television, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It didn't take long. The breaking news alert scrolled across the bottom of the screen at 7:30 a.m. Sable Harlan Blythe arrested in connection with multiple homicides. James turned up the volume. Taken into custody at a Portland hotel early this morning. Police sources confirmed that Harlan Blythe was attempting to flee the state when she was apprehended. Evidence recovered from her hotel room allegedly includes false identification documents and large amounts of cash. The reporter cut to a press conference with Detective Morrison. "Based on evidence provided by James Harlan and corroborated by our investigation, we have arrested Sable Harlan Blythe on charges of murder in the first degree, attempted murder, fraud, and obstruction of justice. We are also reopening the investigation into the death of Jackson Harlan." A reporter shouted a question. "What about the charges against James Harlan?" "All charges against Mr. Harlan have been dropped. He is no longer a suspect in this case." James felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Relief. His phone buzzed. A text from Raina. She tried to get a call to her last night. Hospital security stopped her. "Kid's safe." Another text, this one from Clem. "Congratulations. Beer's on me." And a third from Garrett. "Custody hearing scheduled for next week. Bring tissues, you're going to need them." James drove to the hospital, expecting to find reporters camped outside. Instead, he found only normal traffic people going about their daily lives, unaware that a serial killer had been sleeping in their community for years. Calder was sitting up in bed, eating breakfast and watching the news coverage. "Uncle James." He pointed at the television. "You did it. You got her. We got her. Your testimony was crucial. What happens now? Now you get better. Then we figure out what comes next." "I know what comes next. I come live with you." James sat down beside the bed. "It might not be that simple. There are legal processes, evaluations. I don't care. You're the only family I have left. What about your mom's side?" Calder's expression darkened. "She told me they were all dead, but she told me a lot of things that weren't true." Over the next week, the full scope of Sable's crimes began to emerge. Police in 3 states reopened cases. The FBI launched a task force to investigate her activities over the past decade. The evidence was overwhelming. Financial records showing payments to Vance Keller. Digital forensics revealing that the prescription in James's name was forged. Phone records placing Sable near the river where Vance's car was found. Most damning of all was Calder's testimony. He described 3 days locked in that room, surviving on water from a small bottle his mother had left him. He talked about the injection she'd given him, the way she'd smiled when he'd asked why she was doing this. She said Uncle James would get blamed for everything, Calder told the court. She said people would believe her because she was pretty and he was an angry man. But Uncle James isn't angry. He's just sad. The custody hearing was held on a Friday afternoon in a small courtroom with wood paneling and fluorescent lights. James wore his best shirt and the tie Clem had insisted on buying him. The judge was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and no patience for nonsense. "Mr. Harlan," she said, "this court has reviewed your background, your financial situation, and the recommendations of Child Protective Services. We've also listened to Calder's own wishes in this matter." James held his breath. "Given the extraordinary circumstances of this case and the clear bond between you and your nephew, I'm awarding you full custody of Calder Harlan, effective immediately." The gavel came down, and James felt Calder's hand slip into his point 6 months later. They stood on the property that had once belonged to Jax. The house was smaller than Sable's showcase, but it felt like home in a way the other place never had. "You sure about this?" James asked as they walked up the front steps. "It's where Dad grew up," Calder said. "It's where you grew up. It's where I want to grow up." Nero bounded up the porch steps behind them, older but still enthusiastic. He'd taken to his new life with typical dog adaptability. As long as his people were happy, he was happy. James unlocked the front door, and they stepped inside. The house still smelled like sawdust and coffee, the way it had when their father was alive. But there was something else now, something that felt like possibility. "Think we'll be okay here?" Calder asked. James looked at his nephew, healthier now, stronger, but still carrying shadows that would take time to fade. "Yeah," he said, "I think we'll be fine." As they explored their new home, James thought about justice and patience and the long road back from betrayal. Sable was in prison, where she would stay for the rest of her life. Vance Keller's body had been found in the Columbia River, weighed down with chains. The truth had finally surfaced, like everything does eventually. But the most important truth was the simplest one. Sometimes family means the people who show up when everyone else walks away. "Uncle James," Calder called from the kitchen. "I found Dad coffee maker. Want to try to get it working?" "Sure thing, buddy." James followed the sound of his nephew's voice toward whatever came next.